Welcome to our first Power Half Hour here for 2025. And for Power Half Hour, we just spent 30 minutes chopping it up about a topic that matters most to folks in competitive intel and product marketing. And today we have a very special guest joining me. It's none other than Mara Conrad, the Senior Content Services Manager here at Klue. She's going to be talking about all things around building consensus for your competitive tone. And as we get her up on stage, folks in attendance, I know people are trickling in, and Jen's put it into the chat. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Mara, where are you tuning in from today?
Seattle. It is dark and gloomy and rainy and gross, as per normal.
I know. Behind the scenes too, like right before we got on, Jen, who is running point guard on all things community here, looked at me and was like, Adam, it's kind of dark, and like, where's the natural light you said you'd get? And I was like, Jen, I live in Vancouver. It is dark, gray, and rainy. Yep, but hopefully folks in attendance are somewhere a little bit sunnier and having a good time. So hi Tracy. I see we've got Tracy in from France, a regular. First things first, before we get into your presentation, Mara, I have a question for the chat. So Jen, if you want to pin this to the chat too. Question, and then I'll flip it to you, Mara, is does your company or previous companies you worked at have an official competitive tone? And if so, how would you describe it?
Yeah. Are you pitching it to me? Am I answering the question?
I'm pitching it to you first, whether it's here or at prior companies.
Yeah. I mean, the whole point is that there wasn't one at my previous organizations, right? That's where this came from. So, I didn't have one at my previous organization, and I was just getting so stuck in everything. I was like, this is ridiculous. Why are we having all these same delays at every time that I was trying to deliver an asset, or having the same conversation with sales or sales enablement, et cetera? We're all kind of just running around in circles. So I hope that previous organization that I built it for originally still uses it. But yeah, I didn't have one, and now we do. And I love it. It's just a lot more streamlined, in my opinion. I don't know. How's the chat looking? Anybody else have one already?
Yeah, well, we have Pierre coming in here too, coming in from US. Pierre, Tracy, others in attendance. Define how you would say your competitive tone is within your organization, and if it's aligned or if it isn't. They're going to start to trickle in here. But without further ado, I'm going to flip it over to you, Mara, to start presenting. And folks in attendance, we've got a bunch of questions that were sent ahead of time. We'll get to those. But if you have a question throughout, a comment throughout, drop it in the chat. I am going to be sort of the voice of God and just interrupting Mara very rudely with all of your questions throughout. Because we don't want just Mara just talking into the void. We want to have this. We want to be answering the questions everyone has for the 30 minutes that we have together today. So without further ado, Mara, I'm flipping it over to you.
Well, thanks. Thanks so much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Obviously, I was humbled to be asked, especially for the first slot for 2025. So I'll take it. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Mara Conrad. I'm a Senior Content Services Manager here at Klue. So I get to help organizations on a regular basis. And one of the things that I like to talk about is building internal consensus. So this is me. This is just like a really grainy GIF that I threw together. These are some of the assets that I used to have to make as a product marketer, as a competitive intelligence practitioner. And I used to get stumped all the time with different approval processes, whether that was legal, sales enablement, having the right alignment with marketing and what they were putting together, et cetera, and just trying to get the needle moving forward. So everything was on hold, always had these delays, repetitive approval processes. And I really wanted to have internal consensus on tone, applicability per asset type. I wanted to get that streamlined and wanted to have that prompt delivery. If you are in the competitive intelligence space, then you know that sometimes the prompt delivery makes all the difference in the world. Getting that asset out on time, having the right talk track on time, because sometimes you're reacting to something that's happening in the industry. So the two things that I kind of am recommending here is, or talking through, is how to set up your actual tone, and then how to set up standard materials to go along with it. that's kind of what we're going to hit on. I'm waiting for the voice of God. It's going to just surprise me at any time. Adam's just going to be there. I do want to set the tone. That these 4 are what I created for a previous organization, but there can be so much more than this. So when we're thinking about, sometimes we think about tone and competitive and we think it's only going to be negative or passive aggressive, and it doesn't have to be the case. So as we walk through these, I have some different examples, but also there's examples that are very positive and endearing. So I'll throw a few of those freebies in as well. This is the tone that I set for a previous organization. So ambiguous is that could be any competitor. There's nothing to really distinguish between you and who you're talking about in the industry. Indirect mention is we're subtly mentioning the competitor, but you kind of have to know what we're talking about for it to really resonate with your target audience. Direct mention sensitive, we're saying something, we're maybe even saying the actual name of the competitor, but we're not mudslinging, we're not being super, super bold about it. We're not, we don't need to get our legal team involved. Whereas direct mention bold, you probably are having to get your legal team involved. You're probably really making sure that everybody knows that this campaign is going to go out on this day at this time, or this is what this asset could do. A lot of direct mention bolds are gated content. So if you're thinking about that late stage sales asset, direct mention bold might be the right ballpark for you. How are we doing, God? Yeah, I'm just waiting. It's going to be so scary when Adam pops in. That's what I know is going to happen. But so first off with ambiguous, again, this is pretty standard. This is another vendor in our market is what you're putting on your alt pages or maybe your blog articles, but it's always going to be the default for your homepage, in my opinion. Your website homepage is always going to be ambiguous because it's really only about you. So came to us from a competitor, what makes us different from competitors, very basic foundational spot. Versus an indirect mention, this is a really fun ad between Samsung and they're talking about iPhones, Apple. Time to get off the fence between switching between a Samsung phone and an Apple phone. So we're subtly mentioning the competitor, but you kind of have to know the features. So in this ad, there's this millennial looking dude. He's sitting on the fence. He has an Apple phone. He's looking over the fence at Samsung and is saying, hey, how can they have these phones that flip or these phones that fold? And why won't he just get off the fence and move over to Samsung? Direct mention sensitive is we're talking about the competitor by name, right? So Taco Bell breakfast is here and Ronald McDonald loves it. This is a Taco Bell ad. It's calling out Ronald McDonald, but it's doing it in a really sensitive way because it's not Ronald McDonald the way you would think of it, right? Golden arches, lots of red and yellow. It is very sensitive. It's actually just talking about a bunch of guys named Ronald McDonald that Taco Bell found around the United States and put into their ads for Taco Bell breakfast. So again, we're mentioning Ronald McDonald, but not necessarily in the way that you might think. And then direct mention bold. This is a very famous ad, right? This is the guy, Paul, that worked for Verizon, and it was the "Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?" And then he switched to Sprint. It was a big call out, and it names the competitor outright. You definitely want to have your ducks in a row for this type of ad or this type of campaign or asset. Make sure that you've got it all right. Setting up your standard materials. I'm flying through this because I know there's already been questions that have been submitted, and because I know that there are probably some people in the chat that have some countering opinions, or maybe you have some alignment opinions. Feel free to let me know. So setting up your standard materials here. This is, again, what I use for my organization. Setting up those standard materials. Oh,
God's here. I love this now. Okay, so when you went through these examples, there was a really good question from Olivia on alignment of tone across all touch points too. So I know you mentioned different scales here, but different touch points in terms of maybe in the buyer journey, like you share, there's maybe a lot of these kind of maybe broader ads, but then there's also sort of assets that will be across maybe different areas of the funnel, pre-sale, post-sale. How do you look at that?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the standard materials that I would say at least are, more post sales, but homepage, website, ambiguous, indirect mention, customer stories, live webinars. These are just some examples of when you could potentially use certain pieces of the scale that I developed. But Olivia, hi, you're great, by the way. Olivia, when we're thinking about the buyer journey itself, I think if you have that internal alignment, then it's a lot easier to set up different pieces of the puzzle as you go through that buyer journey. So when we start at pre-sale, when we start at an ad campaign, maybe it's your SEO setup. How do you want that SEO to come across when someone Googles your company or Googles your industry? What do you want it to sound like? And then is that going to match how your SDR talks about how you're different than your competitor? Is that going to match how you talk about your AE talks about you? So really kind of thinking through the entire message and how you're coming across. There are still organizations and industries out there that use battle card language or that kind of more aggressive language. Adam, you and I both know this has been something that's been talked about for years, is if you should be using that kind of aggressive tone. And then some organizations that don't do that at all. They don't throw FUD. They don't talk about their competitors. They won't even say their competitor's name on a sales call. So Olivia, when you're thinking about that buyer's journey and how we gain alignment, once you have set up this kind of tone scale, then it's which pieces of tone are maybe applicable to which part of the buyer journey, and then adding that into your assets. Did we answer that, Adam?
I think that's a great answer. And I got one little comment before I fade into darkness here is like Jagrudi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right as well, mentioned that from a competitive tone standpoint from their organization, like they really have it around sales enablement assets, maybe, but less so like broader at a company level, which may speak to these different touch points. It's like we really only talk about competitors during like demo, discovery, or like these really targeted ABM campaigns. I'm not sure if that's something you see kind of a bit more common, and it really typically only happens or traditionally happens a lot later in the funnel.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that that's true, right? It is seen a lot in sales, and as far as those assets, especially those late stage, right? The external PDF sends where you're really trying to get that deal across the line, or that sales pitch deck that has a specific matrices, right? Those feature comparison matrices that every salesperson's asking for. But I guess my question to anybody on the call is, how do you then make sure that the rest of your organization is saying the same thing, right? As a product marketer, it is so, at least in my experience, it is so frustrating to listen to a call where a salesperson says something and I'm like, no, don't say it like that. Oh God, it's driving me crazy. But then it's also, okay, well, where did they hear it from? Oh, well, it was said in a marketing meeting, or, oh, it was said in a, kickoff call, or in a whatever it is. So how do we make sure that we're all on the same page and that it's not just those sales-led assets, if that makes sense?
Totally. And literally, as you said that, Tracy put a great comment in, which is really around alignment, sales leadership, and coaching sellers, really coaching everyone to be on the same page. But I will fade back to darkness for you.
Goodbye, God. Tracy, absolutely. And Tracy's a guru, right? Tracy knows the ins and outs of all of it. So absolutely agree. So this is just kind of my standard materials. So the reason why I bring this standard material set up is because then my suggestion to you is that you actually pitch it to your leadership teams, that we have this as like an actual document within our brand assets, or within our, what we teach our incoming hires, right? When they're going through their onboarding, that we all are on the same page here. So build a use case with examples, show your leadership team where it's hurting the bottom line, that we don't have this alignment around tone. Where is it delaying your projects, delaying your assets, delaying a compete deal from going out? Where is it that you're, to Tracy's point, where is it that your salespeople aren't coached enough? So they're having to bring in their leadership or their leader's leader to have that, late call with a deal with a prospect. They're trying to finish that, get it across the line. And because they aren't coached up enough around how to talk about differentiators, they're having to bring in excess leadership. So this is what I would suggest is, again, find the bottom line, find where it's hurting you, and then collaborate on some adjustments. So when we're thinking about different stakeholders, I know there was a question that had come in, I think in the registration around like, why do different stakeholders care about this? And realistically, again, it is so that you're saying the same thing that they are, because it does you no good if you develop this competitive tone, you get it across your leadership team agrees with you, and then you find out that somebody over here is saying something completely different, whether that's your product team is building something that speaks a different kind of language set, has a different tone in their language, or your sales team or your CS, a lot of time customer success managers, are they saying the same thing that your sales teams are? So just get some different people's opinions, collaborate on that, and then make adjustments before you fully pitch it to your leadership team. And then this is just how I integrated it into my organization at the time. So this is just like a quick like a scoping brief, right? Like a marketing brief before you pull out an alternate landing page or a website change. And basically what I did is I created this where it had the timelines, it had the reviewers, and then I added in this CT or competitive tone. And this is what I'm saying. This is the requirement, is you have to put this in here. And then when you have somebody like your web designer or your editor is going through your content, they're saying, oh, this is a direct mention sensitive, but it's for this type of asset, like these types of assets. Direct mention sensitive for alternative pages, I'm in the clear. I don't have to get any legal or any other compliance type of leadership sign off. I already have it because this is the standard for this type of material. Now, if I was to pull up this kind of brief and it said competitive tone, direct mention sensitive, but I'm trying to put out a customer story, now my web designer or my editor might need to say, hey, you need to get more approvals for this because it's outside of the standard alignment that we have across our organization. That's where it's going to save you some time. So build that use case with examples, collaborate on the adjustments, get it all approved, and then start to integrate it as a requirement across all of your different scoping briefs. That, my friends, hopefully gives you clarity across your teams, gives you legal and leadership confidence, has higher impact on proactive and reactive competitive content so that you can move fast, and you have the same message, positioning, and competitive tone across everything that you do. That's it. That's all, at least for me. But we have tons of questions that came in that I'm happy to answer, that came in ahead of time that I'm happy to answer. But also, just want to tee us up. Next month, I think it's next month, or the next one, Adam, I get to say this because I'm just such a huge fan. This is one of my besties. His name is Josh Gladstone. I call him Glads. He calls me Rads because my last name's Conrad. So Glads and Rads, kind of a thing. He is a guru when it comes to building out a deal-winning battle card. He knows the ins and outs. He knows how to make it stick and stick really, really well. So if you have not sat in on a session with him before, I would highly recommend it. I'm actually already registered for this as well because even I have things to learn from him. So, Adam, what do we want to do?
Mara,
Want to answer some more questions?
we've got a couple coming in here. So folks, share them in the chat too. I want to start actually with another question that Jagruti shared prior to the session today, was about how often, like kind of cadence, how often should we be looking back at something like this? And what are the parameters to understand if it is resonating well?
Ooh, great questions. Great questions. Okay, so I personally recommended with my competitive tones that I sent out, I recommend at least a once a year glance. Just glance at it. Make sure we're all still on the same page. Have we changed as an organization? That's my standard cadence. But huge leadership change, huge product change. Did you get acquired? Did you acquire? Are you moving? Did your industry move? Was there something huge that happened? Take another glance. Let's make sure that nothing is kind of, you know how things kind of go a little squirrely, Adam? You know what I mean? Like something happens and you're like, oh, something's happening over here. Take another glance. Does anything need to be changed or changed for a season, right? I know even with everything that's going on in California right now, there's some things that maybe we need to be a little bit softer about. Maybe we need to not be as aggressive in our messaging and positioning, depending on your industry, just because there's a lot of wildfires going on in California, which we're sending all of our thoughts and help to as much as we possibly can. So just be aware of the season that's happening, whether that's in your industry or the environment or even the region that you're in. And then as far as parameters go and making sure that it's resonating really well, this is where, to Olivia's point earlier about the buyer journey, this is where things like churn conversations, win-loss, if you're a Klue customer, you maybe already have Buyer Pulse or Klue 360, looking at some of those types of things. What are the keywords that are coming through? If you have a call recording software, are they saying any of the keywords and the patterns that you are mentioning in your ads or in your alternative landing pages? But my very favorite is when your competitor feels so threatened that they must fire back. So for example, I actually, with building out this competitive tone at a previous organization, we built an alt page, like a comparative landing page based off of the tone. And it got enough traction with our competitor that they actually had to spin one up in response to all of the points that we had made. And that felt really good. I was like, okay, it's resonating, it's doing something, because obviously people were bringing our points to them in their calls, or they wouldn't have felt the need to develop something.
It kind of, and again, when you get the tone and how bold or dark you want to be by asset there, you're kind of putting them on the back foot in that situation, which is kind of what you want to do in a spot like that they have to kind of respond to answers or to questions. There's a couple more coming in here. I like Tracy's one that just popped into the chat. Because this is an interesting thing about, like, I think vetting or testing your proposed messaging ahead of shipping. So she was asking, do you do testing with like established customers? Maybe you have like an advisory board, something like that, to propose them sort of messaging that might be a little bit more aggressive than what you would usually do.
Yeah, I think, Tracy, I hear you. I think it might depend on your industry and depend on how many competitors you have in that industry, or what really you're trying to do holistically as an organization. I did do that, but I did it with a very small set of my customers at the time. And it was customers that were already having conversations with my marketing team, with my CMO, about other things. So if you already have a set of customers, like an advisory board, things like that, that are having conversations about your messaging as a whole, or how products are resonating, if they're already having conversations, I double dipped into those. I did not ask them to have a secondary conversation with me specifically about this tone. I just threw some of those questions in. So I think that's really going to depend on the industry that you're in, what kind of conversations you're already having with some of your current customers, or if you're trying to build something from the ground up.
I like bringing this element into, because I think we've talked about like organizational alignment, briefing, what are the assets and where should they sit on the spectrum. But bringing in your actual buyers, your actual customers, to be sort of a validation source. One is sounding more about validation source as well, that it's not just like, I think this asset should go here. It's like, you're kind of you're using them as sort of a validation point, which is, I mean, anyone that has, any company that has like a strong, whatever you want to call it, customer advisory board, whatever terminology, but tight customers that are willing to kind of give that feedback too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, and also the people that would be, if we're talking about actual assets, who's sending those assets? Most of the time, that's probably sales. So what do they need? What have they built on their own? Because they probably have built something on their own already. What have they built? What's resonated there? What can we really kind of streamline and elevate so that it is from an organizational perspective and not just from a seller? But they're building things that they know work. So let's try to amplify the message that they have, but in a way that's elevated.
I've got a few more questions here. We've got 5 minutes. So anyone has any comments or questions, please drop them in here. Sarah, I liked your comment here too. Do you have an additional question on that point? And if you get a chance to respond to that, I'll ask Jagruti has another question here. And this comes up across a lot of pieces, but I think it's around specifically, there's like they're divided across various industries. The landscape's changing based on industry, verticals. It becomes really difficult to be direct or subtly mention a competitor from a company standpoint. How do you think about this when your products serve so many different industries, and then there might be like a different niche competitor across all of these?
Yeah. Ooh, great question. It feels like this human and I need to have a chat. That's what I'm picking up. Um, yeah, no, I agree. I think it's, again, that comes down to organizational structure though, from just this very brief me thinking about it in a second. Organizational structure, who's in charge of that line of business? Who's in charge of the competitors in that line of business, if anybody? How can we tailor our alignment around competitive tone, at least on a foundational level? Is it, hey, this is something that's in the indirect mention, sensitive, no matter what industry, no matter what niche, no matter which line of business we're talking about, we can say this about this competitor, or we can talk this way about this competitor. And then based off of this funnel or based off of this channel, we can go a little bit deeper. That's, I think, my first inclination. I might need to understand it a little bit better though, to be able to kind of have some more points, but I would happily continue the conversation for sure.
Another note here from Pierre, I want your take on too. We just talked about sort of using a customer's advisory board, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Pierre mentions partners as well.
Ooh, oh, for sure.
And
Great call out.
Have you seen that before? Have you seen working with partners in terms of, this might be an interesting one too, because he mentions like customers give you the feedback of one customer, partner gives you a feedback of many customers. But partners also become interesting where maybe they're not just exclusively working with you, they may also be working with said competitors. So give me any takes you have on that delicate dance right there.
Yes. And it is such a delicate waltz that we do with our partners. We love partners, right? We love what they bring to the table. We love their perspective. They are often a lot more transparent about what they are hearing from the customers that they're speaking with. And I would totally agree with you. What I've done in that instance is I've had a partner specific asset. So when we're thinking about the kind of standard materials that I laid out, hey, with partners, let's do indirect mention or direct mention sensitive, right? Let's talk about the competitor, but let's talk about them in a sensitive kind of way, versus when we're talking to our customer one-on-one directly, maybe it's a little bit more bold, because you're right, that partner is probably having multiple conversations in different areas. I would say try to tailor the asset to the partner, make sure that it is very specific about what we're saying, when we're saying, and how we're saying it, so that it lands really, really well. And in case that asset does end up in someone else's hands, you don't have mud on your face, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Just avoid mud if you can.
Avoid any kind of mud, Are there any, I know we're just wrapping up here. Folks, if you have additional questions, comments, want to connect with Mara as well, hit her up on LinkedIn, Mara Conrad, should be pretty easy, Conrad with a K. And also in the Compete Network community here, you can send messages to her on her profile there. You can check out more of our expertise. Any parting words before we wrap up here on our Friday?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say I personally believe that clarity is really reasonable. I'm really big into clarity, really big into transparency. So I love that about having this alignment across competitive tone. I will say, and I'm just going to throw this out there, when we're talking about compete, it inherently becomes negative, or it inherently becomes this idea of passive aggressive. I would encourage you to go find the positives. Think BMW saying goodbye and happy retirement to the CEO of Mercedes-Benz. There, you can go look at that ad. It's a really beautiful ad. Or, taste the feeling of Coke versus Pepsi's the choice of a new generation. They're not inherently negative. They're not trying to be passive aggressive. So there are ways to do it. Your tone can be positive if that's how you want it to flow.
I love that. That's a great note to end this on. Mara, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, we're getting the Oscar.
Yeah, Oscar music.
Hey, any other topics you want us to chat about? Hit up me, hit up Mara, hit up Jen. We'd love to serve more for the community. And we will catch you all next month with Josh talking all things battle cards.
Whoop, whoop.